Welcome, dear listener, to a journey of discovery that will unfold across time and myth. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the world outside fade into the distance. Here, in the quiet stillness, we embark on a story that spans the forgotten ages, a tale of gods and mortals, of strife and transformation, of purpose and the search for meaning. Tonight we venture into the heart of the ancient world of the Tuatha Dé Danann, a people whose story is not merely about their divine nature, but their struggle to understand their place in a world that forever shifts and challenges them. Their battle against the Fomorians, a dark and fearsome enemy, was not just a physical one. It was the struggle to define themselves in a world that constantly asked, "Who are you?" It is a tale that, though shrouded in the mists of time, speaks deeply to us today. For in every battle we face, whether external or internal, we too are striving to answer that question. Who are we really? What is our purpose in this vast and ever-changing world? The Tuatha Dé Danann, like all of us, sought meaning, and in their journey they found more than they ever imagined. As we journey through this story, I invite you to reflect on your own struggles and dreams, your own search for purpose. Let the rhythms of this ancient narrative guide you into a place of deep thought and, perhaps, a little peace. And before we begin, a gentle reminder, if this journey speaks to you, if it stirs something in your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts on what you'd like to hear next. Your presence here is what keeps this journey alive. Now settle in. For we begin our tale with the Tuatha Dé Danann, not as gods, but as a people who wrestled with the very same questions we all face. The land was quiet, as it had been for eons. The emerald hills rolled in soft undulating waves, kissed by the mist that hung like a veil over the forests. The winds whispered ancient secrets through the trees, and the rivers, ever flowing, carried with them the memories of a time long past. But all was not as it seemed, for in the midst of this stillness, a great arrival was taking place. The Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the gods, were about to descend upon the green and mist-covered isle of Eriu, modern-day Ireland. They came not as conquerors, but as seekers. Seekers of purpose, seekers of meaning, and above all, seekers of identity. The legends say they arrived in a cloud of mist, their ships shining like silver under the dim sky, guided by the will of their king, the noble and wise Nuada. The ships, though grand, were not just vessels of transportation. They were the physical manifestation of the Tuatha Dé Danann's journey to find a place in the world. For they were not like the gods of other myths, immortal, aloof, and omnipotent. They were beings who had once lived among the stars, now descended to the earth, tasked with finding a new purpose. The land they arrived upon was fertile and rich with promise, but it was not without its struggles. The Fomorians, dark, monstrous, and ancient, had long held dominion over these shores, casting a shadow of fear and uncertainty upon the land. Their presence was a constant reminder of the struggle for control, for meaning, for survival. And it was against these creatures of chaos that the Tuatha Dé Danann would find themselves locked in a battle, not only for the land, but for their very sense of who they were. Nuada, their king, stood upon the shores of Eriu, his silver hand raised in a gesture that spoke not just to the wind or the sea, but to the very earth beneath him, the earth that was about to bear witness to the coming of something new. But who are we? Nuada asked himself silently. We are not gods anymore, not in the way we once were. We have come to this place, but are we meant to stay? Are we to rule, or merely to exist? This was the question that haunted him, as it haunted each of his people. The Tuatha Dé Danann were not the gods of Olympus or Asgard, resplendent in their might and grandeur. No, they were something different. They were beings caught between two worlds, the divine world from which they came and the human world they sought to understand. And so, their struggle began. But it was not a battle for land or power. It was a battle for something deeper, something that transcended the physical world. They fought to find their purpose in a world that asked nothing of them but to survive. The first clash between the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians was not one of swords and shields, but of ideas. The Fomorians, with their dark and twisted nature, saw the Tuatha Dé Danann as invaders, but the Tuatha Dé Danann were not invaders. They were children of the stars, born from a realm beyond time, and they had come not to conquer, but to grow, to learn, and to answer the question that had plagued them since their arrival. Who are we? The Fomorians, in their arrogance, believed they knew the answer. They saw themselves as the rightful rulers, the embodiment of the chaos that had existed before the gods. They believed that their power over the land was absolute, and they would not give it up easily. But the Tuatha Dé Danann had something the Fomorians did not, an unquenchable thirst for meaning. As the first battle loomed, the Tuatha Dé Danann prepared not just their weapons, but their hearts. For in that moment, they knew that this fight was not just about victory or defeat. It was about something far more profound, their own understanding of their place in the world. And so, the two forces clashed, one born of chaos, the other born of longing. But the true battle, the one that would define the Tuatha Dé Danann, was not the one fought with swords and shields, but the one fought within their hearts. The earth trembled beneath the feet of the Tuatha Dé Danann as they prepared to face the Fomorians in battle. The air was thick with tension, and the scent of salt from the sea mixed with the dampness of the earth. But even in this moment of impending conflict, the hearts of the Tuatha Dé Danann were filled with questions, not just about the Fomorians, but about themselves. For what they were about to face was not merely an external enemy, but a mirror of their own inner struggles. Their leader, Nuada, stood tall at the front of his people, his silver hand gleaming in the dim light, a symbol of both his strength and his vulnerability. His thoughts were a whirlwind, his mind racing between the past and the future. He had once been a god, powerful and sure of his purpose, but now, in this world of men and monsters, he felt lost, adrift in the endless sea of uncertainty. Am I still the leader I was meant to be, he wondered, or have I lost my way along with my hand? His silver hand, a gift from the gods, had once been a symbol of his divine strength, but when he lost it in battle, it became a constant reminder that even the mightiest of beings were not immune to the ravages of time, fate, and the challenges of the world they inhabited. His people had tried to give him a new hand, but it was not the same. It was not a divine hand. It was mortal, imperfect, like them all. And yet, despite this imperfection, he was their king. He was their beacon. In his heart there burned a quiet hope that through this struggle they would find not only victory but meaning. For what was their purpose, if not to rise above the chaos and define themselves in a world that demanded answers? The Fomorians, their enemies, were a stark contrast to the Tuatha Dé Danann. Twisted and grotesque, they were born of the primordial darkness, a force of nature as ancient as the earth itself. They were chaos incarnate, unpredictable, destructive, and merciless. But beneath their monstrous forms there was a shared vulnerability, a fear that the world they ruled was slipping from their grasp. King Bela, the Fomorian leader, stood at the head of his forces, his single, terrible eye gleaming with malice. His gaze could turn a man to stone, and his strength was legendary. Yet, even as he prepared for battle, his mind was clouded with doubts. Have we truly won this land, he wondered, or have we simply become its tyrants, bound to destroy it in the end? The Fomorians were not creatures of introspection. They lived in the moment, driven by hunger, greed, and an unrelenting need for control. Yet even they knew that the world they fought for was fragile. The winds of change were blowing, and the Tuatha Dé Danann, with their desire for meaning and self-discovery, represented that change. As the two armies faced off, There was a palpable sense of fate in the air. The ground beneath them seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the very earth knew that this was not merely a clash of forces, but a clash of ideas, a battle for identity, purpose, and the very soul of the land. The battle began with a roar that echoed across the hills, the sound of steel clashing against steel, the screams of warriors rising above the din of the conflict. But as the fight raged on, something strange began to happen. It was not just the Fomorians who were pushing back the Tuatha Dé Danann. It was the doubt within the hearts of the Tuatha Dé Danann themselves. Do we fight for victory, or for something more? Nuada wondered, his thoughts cutting through the chaos of the battlefield. Do we fight for the land, or for the right to be who we are? As he fought, he could feel the weight of his question pressing down upon him. The clash of swords, the blood spilled in the name of survival. None of it seemed to matter as much as the question that gnawed at him from within. What was the point of victory if they did not understand who they were? What was the cost of power if it was not tempered by purpose? For the Tuatha Dé Danann, this was not just a battle for the land. It was a battle for their very souls. They fought not just to defeat the Fomorians, but to find a place for themselves in a world that demanded they define their purpose. The battle raged through the night, a storm of chaos and clarity, of violence and reflection. The Tuatha Dé Danann fought with everything they had, courage, strength, and the hope that, in the end, they would find the answers they sought. But even as they fought, they knew that the true victory lay not in defeating their enemies, but in finding the peace that came with knowing who they truly were. And so, as the sun began to rise over the battlefield, casting its first light upon the blood-soaked earth, the Tuatha Dé Danann paused. They stood amidst the ruins of battle, their swords lowered, their breaths heavy with the weight of what they had just experienced. Nuada looked upon his people, his heart heavy with the same question that had haunted him since their arrival. Have we found our purpose? And for the first time he realized that perhaps the question itself was the answer. Perhaps the true meaning was not in the victory or the defeat, but in the search itself. The journey, not the destination, held the key to their identity. And so, with a weary but hopeful heart, Nuada led his people onward, toward the unknown, toward the future, and toward the possibility that, in their struggle, they would find not just victory, but understanding. The battlefield was eerily still, as the sun stretched its first golden fingers across the horizon, casting long shadows that lingered over the remnants of the struggle. The air, once thick with the clamour of weapons and the cries of battle, now held a quiet reverence, as if even the land itself needed a moment to reflect. The Tuatha Dé Danann, their bodies battered and their spirits weary, stood in the stillness, each of them touched by something deeper than the physical toll of the fight. They were alive, but at what cost? Nuada gazed over the field, the weight of the previous night's battle pressing down on him. His silver hand, though a testament to his strength, felt heavier now, as if it carried the burden of every question that had been left unanswered. There was victory in their eyes, yes, but it was tempered by something else, something that could not be put into words. Did we win, or did we merely survive? The question echoed in his mind, and for a moment, the king of the Tuatha Dé Danann wondered if he would ever truly understand the answer. They had pushed the Fomorians back, driven them from the land, but had they found what they had come for? Around him, his people too seemed lost in their own reflections. The battle had been fought and won, but the sense of victory felt hollow, as though it were not the culmination of their journey, but merely a step along the way. It was the young goddess Brigid who first spoke, her voice soft but filled with an undeniable wisdom that had nothing to do with age. She approached Nuada, her eyes reflecting the colours of the dawn, the same hues that had touched the battlefield before the chaos had begun. In her hand she carried the remnants of a flower, once vibrant and alive, now wilted and frail. its petals torn from the wind's fury. We won, but did we learn? Brigid's words were gentle, like the breeze that touched the hills. Did we find what we were meant to? Or was this simply another fight, a struggle that leaves us empty in the end? Nuada's gaze shifted to her, his heart heavy with the weight of her question. He wanted to say something profound, something that would give meaning to their victory, but the truth was that he didn't know. How could he, when the battle had been so much more than just a clash of armies? This is not who we are, he thought. We are not just warriors, born to fight and die in the name of conquest. There must be more. His mind turned to the other gods and goddesses of his people, each one an embodiment of an ideal, a force that defined their existence. There was Lugh, the warrior and craftsman, whose skill with the spear was unmatched. There was Dagda, the wise and mighty father figure, who carried the knowledge of generations, and there was Morrigan, the goddess of fate and prophecy, whose presence loomed large over every battle. Each of them, in their own way, had sought purpose in their unique gifts and roles. But what of him? What was Nuada's role in this world? What was his gift, beyond his strength and his title as king? He turned away from Brigid, looking toward the horizon, where the first rays of light were warming the land. His thoughts turned inward, searching for the answers he had long sought, but had never quite found. The sun climbed higher, bathing the land in the golden warmth of a new day. The air, once heavy with tension, now felt light and full of possibility. There was something about the dawn that always carried with it a sense of renewal, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, the world could begin again. Brigid stood beside him, her gaze following his as the landscape unfolded before them, a vast canvas of life and potential. "We are not defined by our battles," she said quietly as though reading his mind. "We are defined by what we make of the quiet moments that follow, what we do with the peace we earn." Nuada nodded, his heart stirring with the truth of her words. The battle had been a necessary part of their journey, yes, but it was not the journey itself. The real work, the true test of their purpose, was what they would do now. In the quiet aftermath, they would have to rebuild, to redefine themselves, not as gods, but as people who had fought for something deeper than just survival. They had come to Eriu in search of a place, a purpose, a meaning. And though they had found neither in the chaos of battle, they had gained something more, a sense of what it meant to question, to search, and to grow. They were no longer just gods who ruled from afar. They were beings who had faced their darkest fears and come out the other side uncertain, but wiser. Nuada turned to Brigid, his expression softening. "Then let us rebuild, not just the land, but ourselves. Let us find the peace that will guide us forward, for that is the true victory." The Tuatha Dé Danann together stood in the stillness of the moment, as if the very earth was holding its breath. The battle had been won, yes, but the real struggle, the true journey, had just begun. And so they would walk forward, into the unknown, with the knowledge that their purpose was not something that could be given to them by gods or men. It was something they would have to find for themselves through every step they took. The days following the battle passed slowly, like the gentle unfolding of a flower's petals, one by one, revealing the subtle beauty beneath. The land, scarred from the conflict, began to heal. The once war-torn fields slowly transformed into places of quiet growth. Lush grasses replaced the blood-stained soil, and the once drenched earth now hummed with the soft song of new life. It was as if the earth itself had taken a deep breath and exhaled, ready for the next chapter of its long story. But for Nuada and his people, the battle's end did not bring the peace they had expected. Instead, it left them with a profound sense of unease. The question that had haunted them since their arrival on Eriu remained unanswered. Who are we? As the days turned to weeks, the Tuatha Dé Danann struggled to find their footing in this new world. The scars of battle were not only on their bodies, but also in their hearts. Their minds, once clear with the certainty of their divine purpose, were now clouded with doubt. They had defeated the Fomorians, yes, but had they truly conquered the forces that threatened them most? The monsters within? Nuada found himself walking through the quiet forests, away from his people, seeking solace in the solitude of nature. The rustling of the leaves, the murmurs of the wind, the distant calls of birds, all of these were familiar, comforting. And yet, they did little to quell the storm brewing inside him. He had always been the king, the leader. He had always known his role, his purpose. But now he was adrift. His people looked to him for guidance, and yet he did not have the answers they sought. His silver hand, once a symbol of his strength and divinity, now felt like an anchor, heavy and unyielding. Am I truly fit to lead them? He wondered. What kind of king am I if I cannot even answer the most fundamental question of who I am? It was in this moment of deep reflection that Lugh, the sun-bright god of skill and strength, came to him. Lugh was a man of action, always focused, always moving. His brilliance with the spear and his knowledge of every craft made him a legend among his people. But even Lugh, in his own way, was burdened by the question that weighed so heavily on Nuada's mind. "You walk with a shadow, my king," Lugh said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "I have seen it in your eyes these past weeks. What is it that troubles you?" Nuada turned to face him, the weight of his thoughts pressing on him. "I do not know who I am anymore, Lugh. I am not the god I once was, and in this new world, I do not know what I am meant to be." Lugh, ever wise, did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked around at the quiet forest, his gaze lingering on the sunlight that filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. After a long pause, he spoke, his words slow and deliberate. "The world has changed, Nuada, and in that change, you must change too. We all must. The battle was not the end of our story. It was the beginning of something deeper, something that cannot be fought with swords or shields. It is a battle of the heart, a search for meaning in a world that is no longer defined by the gods." Nuada listened, his heart stirring with a mixture of confusion and hope. Lugh was right, he realized. The world had changed, not just for them, but for all of creation. The gods were not what they once were, and neither were the Tuatha Dé Danann. They had been born of the stars, yes, but they had descended to earth with the same questions that all mortals faced. What was their purpose? Why were they here? And most importantly, how could they define themselves in a world that was constantly shifting? Lugh continued, his voice softer now, as if speaking directly to Nuada's heart. "Do not look for answers in the past. Look to the future. The world is not a static thing. It is alive, and it moves, and so must we. We are not gods anymore, Nuada. We are something more. We are beings with the power to create, to shape, and to discover who we are through the very act of living." Nuada's heart swelled with something he had not felt in weeks. Hope. Lugh's words were like a light breaking through the fog of uncertainty, offering a glimpse of clarity. He had been searching for answers in the wrong places. The answers would not come from his past, from his old identity as a god. They would come from the choices he made, from the life he built in this new world. With a deep breath, Nuada looked at Lugh, a new determination in his eyes. "Then let us begin, my friend. Let us walk forward, together, and discover what we are meant to be." Lugh nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Together, always." And so, with these words, the Tuatha Dé Danann began to step into the future, not as gods, but as something more, something human, yet divine in their own right. They were no longer defined by the battles they fought, or the crowns they wore. They were defined by their journey, by the questions they asked and the answers they sought, not from the past but from the endless horizon ahead. As Nuada and Lu walked back toward the camp side by side, the air around them seemed to hum with the promise of new beginnings. The past was behind them, and the future stretched out like an uncharted map ready to be explored. They did not have all the answers, but perhaps in that they had found the key to their true purpose. The days drifted into weeks, and with each passing day, the Tuatha Dé Danann found themselves slowly piecing together the fragments of a new identity. The weight of battle had left them all scarred, but it had also left them wiser, more aware of the complexities of the world they now inhabited. They were not gods, nor were they mere mortals. They were something in between, a people caught in the balance, striving to understand their place in the grand tapestry of existence. Nuada, now filled with the quiet strength of purpose, gathered his people together. The camp had become a place of learning, of growth, and of healing. Around the central fire, the gods and goddesses of the Tuatha Dé Danann sat, not as sovereigns, but as equals, each of them reflecting on their role in this new world. Lu, with his sharp mind and boundless energy, spoke often of new crafts, new ways to harness the resources of the land. His brilliance was not confined to the battlefield or the forge. His eyes saw potential in everything, the mountains, the rivers, the very stones beneath their feet. He was a man of vision, of purpose, and he shared that vision freely with those around him. Brigid, the goddess of fire and healing, tended to the wounded both in body and in spirit. Her heart was boundless, filled with compassion for every living being. She was a teacher, a healer, a nurturer, and in her the Tuatha Dé Danann saw the embodiment of the balance they sought to achieve between strength and kindness, power and peace. Dagda, the wise and mighty, sat by the fire in silence, his great cauldron at his side. Though he was a god of plenty, he now found himself focusing on something far more important: giving. He shared what he had, not just with his people, but with the world. His heart had softened with age, and his wisdom was as vast as the oceans. To him, the true meaning of life was not in taking, but in giving. Giving to others, giving to the earth, and most importantly, giving to themselves. And then there was Morrigan, the goddess of fate and prophecy, whose presence loomed over the camp like a shadow. Her silence was a mystery, but it was in that silence that the others found clarity. Morrigan did not speak of the future. She did not offer them easy answers. Instead, she taught them to listen, to the whispers of the wind, the murmur of the rivers, the pulse of the earth beneath their feet. She taught them that fate was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced, shaped, and understood. Nuada watched them all with a growing sense of gratitude and admiration. These were not just his people. They were his companions on this journey, each one a thread in the intricate weave of their shared purpose. As the night grew deeper and the fire flickered low, Nuada rose from his seat, his heart full of a quiet resolution. He addressed the gathered gods and goddesses, his voice steady and calm, yet filled with a weight of emotion. "We have come far," he began, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "We have fought battles, some won, some lost. We have lost parts of ourselves, but we have also found parts of who we are. And now we stand on the threshold of something greater, something more meaningful than any of us could have imagined." There was a pause, and the flickering flame seemed to pause with him, casting soft shadows on the faces of his people. "We are no longer the Tuatha Dé Danann that arrived on these shores," Nuada continued. "We are something new. We are beings of this world now, not just of the heavens. We are not defined by our past, by our power, or by our battles. We are defined by what we choose to be from this moment on." The air felt heavy with his words, and in that moment, every soul present felt a stir in their hearts. This was not just a king speaking. It was a leader who had found his truth, and in doing so, had given them all a glimpse of their own. Lug, Ever the Visionary nodded in agreement. "We must build," he said, his voice clear and firm, "not just with stone and wood, but with our hearts, our hands, and our minds. The future is not something that happens to us. It is something we create," Brigid stood and added. "And we must heal, not just the land, but ourselves. We have been through so much, and yet the greatest battle is the one we fight within ourselves. We're all wounded in ways seen and unseen, but together we can heal." The words of each god and goddess resonated deeply within Nuada. He had once thought that his role as king was to lead them through battles, to protect them from external threats. But now he realized that his true role was to guide them inwards, to help them discover their true purpose, not just as warriors, but as beings capable of both creating and transforming the world around them. As the fire burned low, casting a soft glow over the camp, Nuada spoke one final time that night. "The Fomorians were a shadow, but we are the light. The real battle is not against an enemy we can see. It is the battle against the fear, the doubt, and the confusion that lives within us. Only by embracing who we truly are, flaws and all, will we find peace. And only by coming together, by building and healing, will we fulfill the true purpose of our existence." The gathered Tuatha Dé Danann, once warriors of the heavens, now understood. The battle they had fought had not been one of weapons and bloodshed. It had been a battle for identity, a battle to understand their place in the world, to redefine themselves not by what they had been, but by what they could become. And so, under the silent watch of the stars, they vowed to walk forward together, not as gods or mortals, but as a people united by the quiet strength of purpose. The journey was far from over, but for the first time they knew that they were on the right path. In the days that followed, the Tuatha Dé Danann embraced the slow, steady work of creation. They had no desire for immediate glory or extravagant displays of power. The gods and goddesses, once revered as invincible, now understood that their true strength lay not in domination, but in collaboration. Nuada, having embraced his own vulnerability, knew that his leadership could no longer be built solely on the foundation of old gods' might. His leadership was now rooted in something much deeper: trust, shared purpose, and the willingness to lead by example. And so he walked among his people, not with the grandeur of a king, but with the humility of a companion. His silver hand, a reminder of both his strength and fragility, no longer felt like a burden, but a symbol of his journey, a journey toward understanding himself and his people. The Tuatha Dé Danann, in turn, began to rebuild not only their homes but their hearts. Together they worked to craft the land into something that reflected the lessons they had learned in battle: resilience, patience, and a shared vision. Lug, with his unending energy, set to work crafting new tools, not just for battle, but for building, tools that would allow them to shape the land, the stone and the wood with precision and beauty. He began to teach the others the crafts he had once learned in the distant lands of their birth, where the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter. The light of the heavens, it seemed, still guided his hands. Brigid, ever the healer, took it upon herself to guide the Tuatha Dé Danann in their spiritual rebirth. She wove a new kind of magic into the air, the magic of compassion, of tending to the wounds that lay not just on their bodies but in their spirits. She created sacred spaces within their community, where the people could come together, share their stories, and heal from the pain they had carried for so long. She understood that while the land could be rebuilt with stone and wood, the heart could only be rebuilt through time, patience, and care. Dagda, with his deep wisdom, became a guide for those who sought knowledge. He built libraries of stone and trees, filled with the stories of their people and the teachings of their ancestors. Yet it was not just knowledge that he shared. It was the understanding that wisdom was something to be lived, not just studied. He encouraged his people to think, to question, to grow. Under his guidance, the Tuatha Dé Danann flourished intellectually, as their minds expanded as much as their lands did. Morrigan, silent as always, watched and waited. Yet in her silence there was a profound teaching. She encouraged them to listen, not just to words, but to the spaces between them, to the currents of fate that flowed through the world. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were like sharp, clear notes in a song. "We are the architects of our fate," she once said, her eyes gleaming with an unspoken understanding. "The world may offer us paths, but it is up to us to choose which ones to walk." As the months passed, the Tuatha Dé Danann built a new way of life, not one defined by war, but by purpose. They rebuilt their homes, their communities, their relationships. They found new meaning in the land they had fought for and in each other. Yet even as they created their new world, something still lingered in the hearts of many, the lingering shadow of the Fomorians. While they had been driven away, their presence was not easily erased. The Tuatha Dé Danann knew that peace was never permanent, that forces of chaos would always rise to challenge them. Nuada often stood at the edge of their settlement, looking out at the horizon where the sun would set in hues of gold and crimson. He knew that the future was not a guaranteed peace, but a series of choices, a series of moments that would define their journey. He wondered if the people of the Tuatha Dé Danann would ever be truly free from the shadows of their past, or if they would always be haunted by the struggle to find meaning in a world that shifted beneath them like the tides. But as he stood there, a soft breeze blew through the trees, and he realized something that gave him peace, a realization as quiet as the nightfall. They had never truly been meant to be free of struggle. The struggle was their story, the search for meaning, the battle for purpose, the fight to define themselves in a world that refused to be still. This was not something they could escape. It was something they had to embrace. And so, in that moment, with the sun sinking low behind him, Nuada found a sense of resolve. We are not meant to be gods, he thought, but we are meant to live, to question, to fight, to grow. That is our purpose. The Tuatha Dé Danann would always be seekers, but in their seeking, they would find not just themselves, but the endless journey that lay ahead. And in that journey, they would always have each other. With the sound of the wind in the trees and the light of the stars above them, the Tuatha Dé Danann knew that they had come to a place of understanding, a place where their purpose was no longer about conquering the world around them, but about discovering who they were within it. And as the moon rose, casting a soft glow over the land, they walked forward, hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. As the seasons shifted, bringing the cool breath of autumn and the quiet whispers of winter, the Tuatha Dé Danann settled into a life that, though peaceful, was not without its challenges. Their new understanding of themselves and their purpose did not shield them from the unpredictable forces of the world. Nature, as always, was both nurturing and fierce, and the winds of change, both literal and metaphorical, began to stir once again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the land, a strange silence swept across the camp. The wind, which had been gentle for weeks, suddenly changed, carrying with it a strange chill that no one could explain. The birds ceased their evening songs, and the rustling of the trees fell quiet, as if the entire forest held its breath. Nuada stood at the edge of the settlement, looking out at the darkening sky. The change in the air was palpable, a sense of foreboding that settled deep in his bones. The quiet of the land felt heavy, like a storm was waiting to break. "Something is coming," he murmured, his voice barely audible in the stillness. Lu, who had come to stand beside him, nodded slowly. "Yes, it is as if the earth itself is restless. But what does it mean?" Nuada's gaze swept over the land, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know. But we must be prepared." The next morning, the winds grew stronger, whipping through the trees with a ferocity that shook the ground beneath their feet. The Tuatha Dé Danann worked swiftly, securing their homes and gathering supplies. Though they had been through countless battles and struggles, the uncertainty of this new threat was different. This was not a war with the Fomorians, or a battle against an external enemy. It was something much more subtle, something that threatened the very foundation of the peace they had worked so hard to build. As the days passed, the wind did not cease. It howled across the land, growing colder and more relentless, and with it came whispers of an ancient force long dormant that now sought to return. It was Morrigan, the goddess of fate and prophecy, who first spoke of what was to come. She had been watching, listening, her sharp eyes reading the signs in the sky and earth. "The winds speak of an ancient force," she said one evening, her voice quiet but resolute. "It is not a force of battle, but one of fate itself. The world shifts, as it always does, but this time something is different. The question is no longer just about who we are, but about what we are meant to become." Nuada listened, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "What does it mean, Morrigan? What is this force that threatens us?" "The winds speak of change, Nuada," she replied, her eyes dark with the depth of her knowledge. "Change that we cannot control. This is not a battle for the land or the throne. It is a battle for the very essence of our being. We have sought meaning, but now meaning itself is in question." Nuada's thoughts swirled as he tried to understand. This was no ordinary storm. This was a storm that sought to challenge the very foundation of their existence. It was not about power, or control, or survival. It was about something deeper, their identity, their purpose, and their place in the ever-changing tapestry of the world. As the days stretched into weeks, the wind never stopped. It tore through the trees, rattled their homes, and sent chills down their spines. The Tuatha Dé Danann, once so certain of their strength and their purpose, now found themselves facing something far more elusive, a force that could not be seen, but only felt. It was the test of their resilience, of their belief in themselves. Brigid, ever the healer, worked with the others to tend to those who struggled under the weight of the storm. But even she could not escape the unsettling feeling that hung in the air. She too felt the change, a change that was not physical but emotional, spiritual. The winds were not just a natural phenomenon, they were a sign, a warning. The gods and goddesses of the Tuatha Dé Danann, united in their shared purpose, gathered one last time around the fire, as the wind howled outside. The flames flickered, casting long shadows over their faces as they discussed their next steps. "This is a test," Nuada said, his voice strong but tinged with uncertainty. "But not one that we can fight with strength alone. We must face it with the same heart that brought us together in the first place, with openness, with humility, and with the courage to face the unknown." Lug, who had always been the one to forge ahead with unwavering confidence, nodded solemnly. "The world will change, and we must change with it. But we must not lose sight of who we are, of the journey we have taken to get here." Dagda spoke next, his deep voice full of quiet wisdom. "The winds may threaten us, but they will also reveal our true strength. We have faced battles before, but this is different. We are not fighting against enemies. We are fighting for our very essence. And that, my friends, is the most important battle of all." Morrigan's eyes glimmered in the firelight as she spoke. The winds are a force of fate, yes, but we are the weavers of our own destiny. If we hold true to who we are, if we stand together, then no force, no matter how ancient, can define us. And so, the Tuatha Dé Danann, standing in the face of the storm, resolved to face this new challenge not with fear, but with the same courage they had always carried within them. They did not know what the winds would bring, but they knew that together they could weather it. As the night deepened and the winds howled around them, Nuada stood, gazing out into the dark horizon. He could not see what lay ahead, but he could feel the stirrings of something new, something profound. The Tuatha Dé Danann had come to this land to find their purpose. Now, the world itself was asking them to redefine that purpose once again. The winds of fate had come, but so had the winds of change, and they too would find their way. The wind never ceased. It raged for days, howling through the trees, pushing against the earth as if it were a living, breathing entity. It was not a wind that carried the usual calm or the nurturing warmth of the seasons. No, this wind felt different. It seemed to tear at the very fabric of the world, as though the earth itself was shaking off old memories, old identities, to make room for something new. In the midst of this unrelenting storm, the Tuatha Dé Danann began to sense the shift within themselves. The peace they had fought so hard to build felt fragile, as if it could be undone with the slightest tremor. Yet, as they gathered together in their camp, the storm outside mirroring the chaos that had once resided in their hearts, they began to realize something profound. This was not a test of survival, but of transformation. Nuada, whose heart had once been heavy with doubt and uncertainty, now stood before his people with a quiet resolve. The winds had torn through the land, but in doing so, they had also opened the door to something new, something that could not be ignored. "We have faced so much," Nuada spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "We have fought against enemies we could see, enemies of flesh and bone. But this storm, this force that is upon us, is not an enemy we can fight with weapons. It is a force of change, of transformation. It calls us to let go of what we were, so that we may become something more." The Tuatha Dé Danann gathered around him, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the fire. They listened intently, each of them feeling the gravity of Nuada's words. They knew that this storm was not a passing disturbance. It was a reckoning, a challenge to everything they had come to understand about their existence. Lugh, ever the visionary, stood beside Nuada. His face, usually full of energy and purpose, was now marked by a contemplative calm. "The winds are not just a physical force," he said, his eyes distant, as though he was searching for something beyond the horizon. "They are the winds of change, the winds that sweep away the old to make room for the new. And perhaps that is what we are meant to embrace. We are no longer the same beings who arrived on this land. The world itself has changed, and so must we." Brigid, whose compassion had guided them through many struggles, spoke next, her voice soft but resolute. "We are a people of healing, not just of bodies, but of hearts and minds, and now we must heal the very fabric of our existence. The winds are testing us, yes, but they are also asking us to rebuild, to redefine ourselves not as gods, but as something more, something capable of true growth." Dagda, who had always been a pillar of strength, nodded. "The greatest strength we have is not in our power to fight or to conquer, but in our ability to adapt. The world changes, and we must change with it. But we must not lose sight of what we have learned along the way. We must remember that the journey itself is where the answers lie, not in the destination." Morrigan, who had remained silent until now, her face inscrutable, spoke last. Her words were sharp, clear, and full of purpose. "The winds will continue as they always do. They are the forces of fate, and they cannot be avoided. But we are the ones who shape our fate. It is not the storm that defines us. It is how we rise from it." There was a pause, a collective breath taken in the stillness of the firelight. Each of them, in their own way, had spoken of the same truth. This was not just a storm of nature, but a storm of the soul. The winds were a challenge, yes, but they were also an invitation to evolve. Nuada turned his gaze to the horizon, where the storm still raged. The land was in turmoil, the wind howling like a beast of nature that would not be tamed. But in the distance, he saw something new, a break in the clouds, a faint light shining through the darkness. It was small, but it was there. A reminder that even in the midst of the greatest storms, there was always the promise of dawn. He turned back to his people, his heart alight with a quiet, steady certainty. We will not be defined by the winds. We will define ourselves by how we move forward through them. The storm is not our enemy. It is a part of us, and we will face it together, not as gods who control the world, but as beings who walk with it, and through that we will find our true purpose. With these words, the Tuatha Dé Danann stood together, their hands linked not in fear, but in solidarity. The storm howled around them, but they stood firm, rooted in the knowledge that they were no longer the same as they had been before. They had been tested, and they had passed. As the winds began to subside, the earth seemed to breathe again, the air clearing, the clouds parting, and the light of the stars shining brighter than before. The storm had come and gone, but in its wake, the Tuatha Dé Danann stood stronger, more united than ever. And so they began again, not as the gods they had once been, but as something more, a people with purpose, bound not by their past but by the endless possibilities of the future. The winds of change had come, and in their wake the Tuatha Dé Danann found not destruction, but the birth of something new. As the storm subsided and the first light of dawn began to stretch across the land, the Tuatha Dé Danann stood in silence, feeling the transformation that had swept through the very air around them. The winds, once fierce and unrelenting, had softened into a gentle breeze, carrying with it a sense of renewal. The earth beneath their feet, though still damp from the tempest, now felt more alive, more grounded. Nuada stood at the edge of their settlement, watching the sky as it gradually shifted from the dark blue of night to the soft hues of morning. The landscape before him, once a place of struggle and doubt, now seemed to hold endless possibilities. The storm had stripped away the remnants of their past selves, their old fears, their former identities, and left them with a blank canvas, ready to be painted with the colours of their future. The other gods and goddesses gathered around him, their faces touched by the first rays of sunlight. Lugh, Brigid, Dagda, and Morrigan. All of them felt it too. The storm had not only tested them, but it had given them something they had longed for: clarity. Lugh was the first to speak, his voice carrying the weight of the transformation they had all undergone. We were once bound by our past, by the roles we played as gods, but no longer. The winds have shown us that we are more than the titles we carry. We are not just gods of old. We are creators of our own future. Brigid, ever gentle but now imbued with a quiet strength, nodded in agreement. The storm took much from us, but it also gave us something precious. It reminded us that true strength lies not in avoiding change, but in embracing it. We have been given the gift of reinvention, the power to shape our lives, to redefine what it means to be us. Dagda, his usually booming voice now softer with reflection, spoke next. We were warriors once, and in some ways we always will be, but our battle now is different. It is not a battle for the land nor for power. It is a battle for peace within ourselves and for the future of this world, and in that battle the real victory lies in the choice we make to move forward together. Morrigan, as always, remained quiet, but her eyes gleamed with a knowing that came from deep within. She spoke only a few words, but they carried the full weight of what they had learned. The winds are not gone. They will come again, but we are not the same as we were before. We know now that we can face whatever comes because we face it as one. Nuada looked at each of them in turn, his heart full of gratitude for their words, their wisdom, and their unwavering support. He had once feared that he would not be enough to lead them, that his past wounds, both physical and emotional, would make him unworthy. But now, standing beside his people, he understood. His worth was not in his strength or his title, but in his willingness to grow, to question, and to evolve. "The storm has changed us," he said quietly, his voice steady with the truth he'd come to accept. "But it has also shown us that change is not something to fear. It is something to embrace. We are not defined by what we were, but by what we choose to become. And together we will create a future that is built not on the remnants of the past, but on the promise of what is to come." With these words, the Tuatha Dé Danann turned towards the horizon, where the sun was now fully risen, casting its golden light across the land. The storm was gone, but its legacy remained, woven into the fabric of their beings. They had come to this land seeking purpose, seeking meaning, and now they knew that their journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. As they stood together side by side, the wind began to stir once more. But this time it was not the howling, destructive force that had once threatened them. It was a gentle breeze, carrying with it the scent of the earth, the promise of new life, and the whisper of possibility. The Tuatha Dé Danann had been tested. They had faced the storm, and they had emerged stronger, more united, and more certain of their place in the world. They had found their true purpose, not in the battles they had fought, but in the choices they made afterward. They were not gods anymore, but they were something greater. They were creators of their own destiny, architects of the future. And with that understanding, they took their first steps into a new world, a world where anything was possible, and the winds of change would forever be theirs to navigate.